Hello, and thank you for having me speak with you. I'm sorry I couldn't do this live, but I hope it leads to a good discussion, and I look forward to meeting you and chatting with you at the networking session tomorrow and coffee break. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have then, and just chat with you and get to know you. So I am Dr. Abby Stevens. I am a postdoc in the US at Michigan State University and the University of Michigan, and I'm going to give you some advice I have on postdoc applications. I currently hold the National Science Foundation Astronomy and Astrophysics postdoctoral fellowship, and that's on pause this semester as I am an instructor in general sciences for intro astronomy for non-scientists. So with that, let's go ahead and outline. So I'll give you a little bit about my background so that you know where my advice is coming from because it's based on my personal experience. I will go over the different types of postdocs that there are, so the different types of jobs you might see advertised. I have some application strategies that worked well for me that I hope work for you, and some tips on like actually writing the applications. This is a very daunting task, but I hope that with a lot of advice and preparation that it'll go smoothly for you. I have a few comments on letters of recommendation, which are an important aspect of your application, and then some more general advice. We'll finish with some links and resources that you can see in the PDF of these slides afterwards. So to start with, I'm from the US. I'm from Rochester, New York, which is right there. This is New York State. New York City's all the way down there. And for university, I went to a small liberal arts college. These are mostly a US thing. It had about 2,000 people at it. And I have a bachelor's of arts in physics and math. One thing I liked about my university is that we could do a year-long senior research project. So mine was in mathematical physics on low dimensional black holes, so 2+1 and 3+1 dimensional black holes, and working through equations of motion in those dimensions. So this is a picture of me with my senior project poster. It was a lot of fun. After that, I went and did a master's degree in Canada. I went to the University of Alberta. So here is most of Canada. Well, not most, part of Canada. Over here, this is like the skinny part of Idaho and Montana in the US. So if you go like 6 hours straight north, you get Edmonton, Alberta. There we had a department of physics, and I did a master's of astrophysics in the physics department. It was 2 years long. 1 year was all courses, and 1 year was all research. And I worked on neutron star theory there with Dr. Sharon Morsink. Here's a picture of me giving a talk at Nerd Night Edmonton, which was a lot of fun on exoplanets. This was like a public talk in a bar. It was great. From there, I went on to the University of Amsterdam for my PhD. So here is Europe, and there's the Netherlands, and Amsterdam's right there. The Anton Pannenkoek Institute that I went to is a large astronomy research institute. So there's like, I don't know, 60 or 80 astronomers there. And it was a great, really intensive, like big astronomy experience. So this is a large old astronomy research institute, had a lot of resources, and was just a great like learning environment for me. Here is a picture of me with some of my colleagues in our first year. We're at the Westerbork Synthesis Radio Telescope, and that's me in silver right there. During this PhD, I did not have any coursework. I was only doing research and doing some teaching as well, but not too much teaching. And from there, I moved back to the US, but to Michigan. So I am in East Lansing. Well, not presently, but usually I'm in East Lansing. I split my time between there and Ann Arbor, which is right there. So I split my fellowship between the University of Michigan and Michigan State University. It's the National Science Foundation Fellowship, but currently that is paused so that I can teach a general sciences intro astronomy class this semester. So I have been a postdoc, I am a postdoc, but I have not yet hired a postdoc yet. So take all this advice with a grain of salt and talk with the other organizers of the workshop who have hired postdocs to see what other advice they would tweak or other things they would give. So the types of postdocs that you might see advertised. The first is named independent fellowships. This is like the National Science Foundation Astronomy and Astrophysics Postdoctoral Fellowship that I have. These are typically seen as the most prestigious, and they are the hardest to get. There will be many, many applications for very few slots. Most countries and regions have their versions of these. So the US has the NASA Hubble, Einstein, and Sagan fellowships. The EU has the Marie Curie Fellowship. The ESO fellowships are hosted in Germany and Chile, and there are many, many more of these. These are just like some highlights. I have a list of all of them linked at the end of this talk. So kind of one step down in the prestige ladder is university-wide independent fellowships. So these are for a specific university. It's money that that university gives out, but you are still doing an independent research program. So you have a supervisor or an advisor, but they are not directly telling you what to do all the time. You get to guide and direct your own research program. These are also fairly prestigious, and they can still be kind of hard to get. Some examples of these, I only know of these in the US, so you might have to look more closely for them elsewhere. But there is the Miller Fellowship at UC Berkeley, there's the President's Postdoc Fellowship at the University of Michigan, and there's the Dirac Fellowship at the University of Washington. There are lots of these listed on the AAS job register. I highly recommend looking there for these types of programs. The last type is project postdocs. These are by far the most common, but they're still not easy to get. These ones are funded from a grant that's awarded to the supervisor. So if the supervisor gets a grant from NASA to look at galaxy evolution with the Hubble telescope and they got some observations, that comes with some money, and they can use that money to hire a postdoc to analyze that data and write up the paper. So these are by far the most common, but there are so many PhDs in astronomy being produced these days that they can still be fairly competitive, especially if they're at like a top name university. There's a lot of great science happening at the not top name universities, but those ones tend to be a little more competitive. There are two other types that are much less common, but I wanted to mention them. These are typically for people who have already done one postdoc and are looking to move up the seniority ladder towards a professorship. So there's the junior group leader. These are most common in Europe. My husband had one in physics in Germany. And this comes with funding for yourself and a PhD student, or perhaps even two PhD students. Typically is more like 4 or 5 years long, but it doesn't always transition into a permanent position. So check what the rules are with the university that hosts you. And these are for people, as I said, who have already done one postdoc, not for brand new, fresh out of the PhD people. There are also a new thing in the US, similar to Junior Group Leader, is the Transitional Faculty Fellowship. I don't know if it's fully called that, but that's what I chose to name it. This is something where you are a postdoc for 1 to 2 years, and it has some teaching component, and you have lots of mentoring from faculty in the department, and the intent is to transition you to a tenure track professorship at that same university in that same department in like 1 to 2 or maybe 3 years. This is not guaranteed, but largely it is their intention to transition you to a professorship. So with those types in mind, we'll go over some preparation strategies for putting together your applications. So the first advice always is talk with your PhD supervisor, your co-authors and collaborators, and your conference buddies, just your whole network, including people that you're meeting now at the workshop, with where the interesting work is happening in your subfield and where are the people who are really great to work with. One thing I continually find is that the people who I work with can really help almost make or break my research experience. And so working with great collaborators and great colleagues is something I find really important. When you are giving conference talks, say that you're on the job market looking for postdocs. Sometimes people might see a talk and think, oh, that person's really great, but they don't necessarily, it doesn't necessarily click that they are finishing their PhD and might be looking for a job. So you can say, I'm on the job market, I'm looking for postdocs. Let me know if you want to talk after. That can be helpful. Also, one thing that really helped me a lot is to contact your colleagues at different universities and offer to give a seminar there for their institute or department, especially if you would like to go there for a postdoc. When I was doing this in 2016 and 2017, I had a lot of travel funding available, so I could travel to those universities. I know with both travel funding going down and COVID happening, that's less possible, but virtual seminars are still pretty good. So going and giving a full seminar for their department or institute is a really, really helpful way to get your name out there. And even if you're not going to work at that university, it could be that a professor from that university ends up sitting on a fellowship review panel for something that you've applied for. So getting your name out there as somebody who is doing cool, fun science is great. Highly recommended. Um, in general, you should have at least one published paper as first author or equivalent if you work in a large collaboration. So if you are debating between starting your applications early and finishing your first paper, finish your first paper. Um, Submitted papers can be listed on your CV, but papers that are in preparation should not be listed on your CV as you are applying these things. So you have to put effort into writing a good application, but papers are very important for a lot of these committees when they're evaluating your applications. So for the application itself, in your postdoc, you want to look to develop a secondary research area of expertise. So keep this in mind as you are looking at what you want to work on and you're writing up research proposals or looking at which projects you might want to work on. Um, so ask around in your network if somebody has a previous application you can look at, especially if it was a successful application. I often get asked for a copy of my successful NSF application because some of this is just like the lottery. Um, and I usually share this with people. I ask them not to share it around just because there's work in there that is unpublished so far. But typically people are happy to help in my experience. And also prepare in advance. Writing up these applications, most of these deadlines are September to November. I think the Marie Curie deadline is like unusually early. The NASA deadlines tend to be October, November. So you should start looking and looking at and planning and working on this over the summer. For these talks that you should be doing beforehand, this should be done in like the spring of the previous, so like this coming spring, or maybe a bit in the fall. So a lot of advanced preparation will help you out a lot. I have found this to help me out a lot. And also, as you are looking at places where you might like to go, consider the life that you will have there. So when making a list of possible jobs, also consider the location. It's important that you like where you live, but also don't rule something out too soon. I know Michigan isn't always the highest on everybody's list of like best places to live, but it's like very lovely. I really enjoy living there. And I didn't live there at all before I moved there for the postdoc. So consider what's important to you in your life. For example, I love winter. So as you can tell, I've always lived in very northern places. I know that I just don't handle like heat and humidity, like a lot of heat and humidity very well. So I've never applied somewhere tropical. Um, if you really need to be by some mountains, like just truly need to be by mountains, look for places that are within, a weekend drive of mountains, I guess. Also, something to consider is that if you have family that will come with you, for example, what visa can your spouse get, and will they be able to work? In the U.S., you and your partner must be married for them to get these access to these benefits. I think in Australia you don't have to be married, but in the U.S. you often do, and I'm not sure about the other countries. You'll have to look it up. So when you are writing these applications, the advice differs a little bit if it's for independent fellowships, either the national and international fellowships or the university-wide ones. For these independent ones, you have to make super clear why this research needs to happen now and why you are the perfect person to do it, and why it needs to happen at your proposed host institute. So you will have already been in contact with a professor at the university where you would like to have this, and they are typically called like your host institute or your sponsoring scientist or some phrase like that. Um, Make it really clear why this research has to happen now, so why they should fund you this grant cycle and not next year, and why you are the one to do it, and why it should happen at that place, what resources they have, or whatever. Um, Give your draft to many colleagues in different subfields and ask them to tear it apart nicely, but really tear it apart and give you feedback. I was given this advice and it was very nerve-wracking, but I did it and it was highly effective for me. I really benefited. As they're reading the kind of red thread connecting idea, so this like main point or main idea of like why your research is amazing and why you need to do it now, This should be very clear throughout the whole thing. So if, like, I work in compact object observations in X-rays, and I gave my drafts to people who worked in exoplanet theory and people who worked on distant galaxies, a high redshift, and people who worked in compact objects, but in theory, like I gave it to a bunch of different people. Some of them could only give it a brief read, but that's okay because sometimes on these panels, each committee member has to read 20 applications, and so they only give it a brief read. So you have to be able to get the idea through in, only giving it a 5-minute glance or something. Um, so yeah, it is making it very clear why this is awesome and why you are the one to do it right now at that place. This is important. I also got the advice to write it like a news article, not a mystery novel. So with a mystery novel, you want to save the punchline for the very end. Um, and this is not actually how you want to structure your proposal because um, you don't want to make them wait until the very end to learn why it's cool or why this needs to happen. You want to tell them everything right up front, and then each additional paragraph is building on more detail and more layers. But in principle, like with a news article, you can, after the first page, you can just cut it off at any point thereafter and not read any more of it and still get the idea of it. Or one of my proposals had to be 10 pages long. It was very long. One of my mentors said you should be able to mix up 2 or 3 of the pages in order, and still understand in general what you're doing and why this should be done. The grammar wouldn't connect as you go from page to page, but in general, it should still make sense, um, and be very compelling why you should be doing this now. So write it like a news article, not a mystery novel. Don't make them wait to find out why it's cool. Tell them right up front why it's amazing and why you are amazing. But the advice is different if you're applying for project postdocs. And again, most postdoc positions are project postdocs. Um, in this one, this is more of a research statement than a research proposal because they have already done their research proposal and gotten the money for it. So you want to address the content of the project. It is in the job advertisement and why your awesome and unique skill set makes you the ideal person to do that research. So don't give them a proposal for new research. They are paying you to work on their project. Giving them a proposal for new research is kind of a guaranteed way to have them not seriously consider your application. Instead, you want to emphasize what experience you have that contributes to what they want. Say, if they want somebody to do a lot of high performance computing, you could say, oh, I did some theory work in my PhD, or even I did some theory work in my master's, so I'm used to running things on a remote cluster, things like that. Or it's about spectroscopy, and you might say, I'm only familiar with X-ray spectroscopy, but I know spectroscopy in general, so optical spectroscopy, I have the connections to be able to figure out this, that kind of stuff. So yeah, address what's in the job advertisement and how you can address that best. In general, for all of them, mention your long-term goals and how working on this project fits into those. Um, in some of the fellowship proposals, they want it very explicitly addressed. In some of them, they just kind of would like to know where you're going, why you want this job, and how this helps you out. They want to see that you have thought about kind of the bigger picture and how this project fits in. Also, general advice I've received and found useful is show, don't tell. So give examples to back up your statements. Like if you say that you are very good at spectral analysis, say, and I've done this paper on it, or and I even like I taught a tutorial at an undergraduate workshop on it, something like that. Use figures. Don't be afraid of using figures. Using too many isn't great because then you don't have enough room for words, but use some figures. Adapt the figure in some image adaptation software so that it's concise and not full of extra junk. So you can even take it from a paper as long as you cite the paper that it's from, that it's adapted from, but remove extra labels that you aren't using or remove lines that you aren't using, like adapt the figures even if they're ones from your own papers, so that it's concise and it fits what you're trying to convey in the proposal. Just so that you know, jobs are so oversubscribed that they are often looking for a reason to reject your application. So there are many more well-qualified candidates than actual jobs they can award. So for the NSF fellowship that I have, um, some hundreds apply. I'm not sure exactly, maybe 200 or 300 apply or so, but they can only give out 8 fellowships. And you could say that maybe the top 20% of applicants would all make for an excellent NSF fellow. So they have to take that top 20%, those 30 to 40 people, and then somehow pick only 8 of them. So there is a luck component to it. You have to set yourself up to be able to take advantage of the opportunity when you have it, but just try not to give them an easy way out. Don't really mess with the formatting so that it just looks really funny and weird, or you've clearly tried to cheat with the margins or something like that. Follow the rules that they give, and don't give them an easy reason to reject it. I also recommend iterating with a writing tutor to be sure the English is clear. Um, I have sometimes helped some of my good friends read over their applications and edit the English. Um, and unfortunately, this is very important. Even if where you are ultimately going to be teaching and lecturing is in Spanish or Portuguese, the research papers that you write are always going to be in English. Many of the conference presentations will be in English, so it's important to convey that you have good written English. So for the letters of recommendation, an important part of your applications usually, you typically need 2 or 3 of them for each application, and you can like use the same people over and over for all of your applications as long as you give them advance notice. When you are asking for a letter of recommendation, the phrase you want to use is, do you think you could write me a very strong letter of recommendation for a postdoc application? The phrase very strong is important in there. Some people could write you a letter because they know you and they think you're good, but they might not know you very well. Maybe they haven't written a paper with you or they haven't seen you teach before. So they think you're good and they like you, but they don't have enough examples that they could write a long, like a longer letter that's very strong. It's like I've asked people and had them say, no, sorry, I don't think I have enough information to write you a really good one. Try asking so and so. So that's totally fine. Um, so yeah, you want to ask about a very strong letter of recommendation. Um, your professors who are writing this should already know this, but you might need to remind them. US letters need to be very positive. Um, this is just kind of the culture of applications in the US. It needs to be very positive. They will try to read between the lines. So if your letter writer gives like just kind of like a standard like, oh, they could improve on something, then that might read to a US committee about like, oh, they are horrible with this one thing, you should never take them. So US letters need to be very positive. And European letters on the other side should be more restrained. If you write a US style letter for a European job, you sound crazy. It sounds like you are completely unhinged and you think this person just that the sun shines out of them and you like it doesn't work. So knowing the culture of where the letter is going to is important for your letter writers to know. And also give them at least 4 weeks notice that you would like the letters. Typically, I have contacted them early in the season when I know where that I'm applying, and then I try to give them 4 weeks notice before the letters are due. Because writing a good letter takes a bit of time, and most professors are writing many letters for many different students, and you need to give them time to do a good job. You can ask a letter writer to include specific pieces of information, like addressing a discrepancy in your grades one semester, like if you had a health problem or a family emergency, or if there's a delay to a paper and there's a good reason for it, they can address that in the letter so you don't have to spend time in your application writing about it. And they can also highlight certain things. If you're very proud of, I don't know, like I helped to start the PhD and postdoc council at the University of Amsterdam to help give us more of a formal voice in how the institute was run. And I was really happy about that. So I asked my letter writers to highlight that a little bit. Um, a word of advice that I have heard from other people is that if you don't have a letter from your PhD advisor, it looks very weird. And so another letter writer must address what happened and why you don't have that letter. There are sometimes very good reasons to not have a letter from your PhD advisor, but that needs to be addressed by another letter writer. If it's not mentioned or addressed whatsoever, it people start to read too much into things and can come away with some bad conceptions. And yeah, you should have somebody address that. Also worth mentioning that if you have a personal reason for wanting to work at that specific university, maybe it's close to your family or your spouse has a job offer nearby, um, it is something not for you to write in your research statements, but for a letter writer to mention. That, even if it's a smaller university that's not as well known and you have this amazing CV, but if you say, I actually have some family that lives in the city nearby, so I'm quite interested in working at your university. This can be a bit compelling for them, and they like that. So again, these are things to have mentioned by your letter writers in their letters, perhaps. Some more general advice I have is just to be aware that there is this ongoing mental health crisis in academia, even for postdocs. I have some articles and studies and everything and resources on my website, which you can click the link in the PDF of these slides. This has been documented for graduate students, but it is true for postdocs as well. And of course, COVID has made everything a lot worse. Um, so to be aware of this and take care of yourself is very important, especially because postdocs tend to have you moving around a lot. It's important to be proactive in taking care of yourself. Advisor fit and sense of belonging is a predictor of mental well-being. So your supervisor can make or break your postdoc experience. So it's important to be working with somebody who is supportive of you, both in terms of your career goals and like the science that you want to accomplish, and to have somebody that is going to be somewhat responsive. I have heard horror stories of advisors who dislike that you are becoming more independent, and so they try to hold up your papers. This is bad. It is very good when you are becoming more independent. As long as you're finishing the work that they are paying you to do, forming new collaborations is typically seen as a good thing. So when you are applying for places and when you have offers, talk with the advisors, talk with other postdocs and graduate students in their group, figure out if this is a place that you think you could work well. There's a lot more just general advice about advisor fit on like academic Twitter and on Astrobetter and stuff. When you're thinking about your intended career path, think about how this postdoc will help you to develop more skills, to be the best candidate for that, and to enjoy the work, right? I mean, in principle, we're all doing this because we like it. So we put up with long hours and with less pay and with moving around a lot because we find the material really enjoyable. So if you start to lose that, it is important to keep in mind the different options and opportunities that are out there. So if you say you think you might eventually want to transition to data science, it might be nice to get a postdoc job that is working with some more machine learning algorithms as applied to galaxy classification or something like that. Though I have received the advice that even if you think you want to go into data science, if they ask you about your job, like on the actual applications, if they ask you about what you would like to do, tell them you want to be a professor, is the advice I've gotten. And I have followed that. Um, so I don't know. Talk with each other at the coffee after this, and I'll chat with you more about it the next day. There's some conflicting advice about this. Another piece of advice I've heard is to look at the CVs of people who have jobs that you want. So, say maybe you don't want to be a professor, but you want to become a staff scientist working on telescopes, or you want to become an observatory manager, or you want to go into a teaching heavy job. Look at the CVs of people who have these kinds of jobs and see what opportunities they've had along the way to give them the skills to get that job. If you want to be at a teaching heavy university and like you really enjoy teaching and mentoring students, having these really high profile research postdocs isn't always a good thing because they think that you might leave because you're not going to be doing much research there. And so having some teaching experience is really, really good for those places. Whereas if you are applying for big name universities that kind of only really focus on research, having teaching is just seen as a detriment to your research. So keep in mind of where you might think you want to go and what skills and experience will help you get there. And again, be sure you're enjoying all of that. So the Astro Better rumor mill, this is a wiki where people can post updates about where they've heard places have sent out application or have sent out acceptances and rejections and who's on what shortlist. This rumor mill only ever has bad news. When I was applying for postdocs, I had a friend check it if I hadn't heard anything, because sometimes they don't send out rejections until like months later. If I hadn't heard anything about one particular application, I would have a friend check the rumor mill for that job just to see if the acceptances had gone out yet or not. Yeah, just to see if it's filled. Don't check it yourself. Don't compare yourself to the other people. Like maybe a little comparison is okay just to see if you're on the right track, but like some people are just ridiculously talented and they just somehow have like 5 papers, and that's okay. Like good for them, but it's also okay if you don't have 5 papers coming out of your PhD. So don't check it yourself and don't compare yourself too much. Just be careful with it. Um, Also, there is just a lot of rejection in academia in general, but it often isn't personal, even though it can feel very personal. So after you're done feeling sad, which is normal and healthy, after that, see what lessons you can learn for next time. See if you can write your science case more concisely, or if they would like to see more preliminary data to back up your hypothesis or something like that. And also, just one thing I find frustrating, but it's worth mentioning, is that the standards continue to rise. So, what used to be enough to land a permanent position before isn't enough anymore. So, the thing, maybe if there's a senior professor in your department, the standards that were necessary for them to get their job now would not get you a tenure track job at that department often. I've heard it said that what you now need to land the beginning of the tenure track job now, what used to be what you needed to get tenure once you already had the tenure track job. So the standards continue to rise. I don't like it, but it's happening. So seeing what somebody was able to do successfully 15 years ago is not an indication of what will work now. But all of that said, celebrate the successes when you have them. If you get a nice job somewhere, if your friend gets a nice job somewhere, you have a paper submitted, like things like this, celebrate them. It's very important to support each other and enjoy the good stuff. So international experience is often necessary. I find it quite fun. I hope many other people do as well. But this can sometimes mean moving far away from your family. Um, this can lead to homesickness, and sometimes it can be so detrimental that you choose to leave instead, which is a very valid thing to do. So keep in mind that, for example, if you would like to end up as a professor in your home country, you will often have to leave that country to get international experience and come back with this big, nice list of international collaborators in order to be competitive for a job there. This is true everywhere but the US. In the US, it's seen as bad if you leave, which, even though I'm American, I don't fully understand. But that's slowly changing, I think. Another thing is that if you are a part of an underrepresented demographic, say you're Latina or Latino, and you don't see anybody else from that demographic at that department, maybe ask some questions of your mentors and of people that are at that place, like postdocs and grad students. Figure out if there's like a problem there, and so there have been people of that identity there before, and they like left because it was a bad place, or if they're, it's a small place and there just don't happen to be anybody like that there at that time. So like if I'm applying somewhere and there aren't any women, like not even any white women, and it's like not a small department, I it raises a flag that just causes me to ask questions. It's not necessarily a bad thing right away, but it just causes you to kind of ask, like, do there just not happen to be any women here right now? Or is it like there have been women here in the past few years and they've all left because it was bad? So just ask some questions if there's a red flag raised, and see what's happening. That was most of my advice. As I said, I am still a postdoc, and I've had some success, which is lovely, but I've not yet hired a postdoc. So listen to some people who have hired postdocs to see what advice they have as well. Um, so there are some resources that I recommend looking through on your own time. Professor Sarah Markov is a research professor in Amsterdam, who's gotten a bunch of really fancy grants. And so if you want a like big prestigious research professor type job, look through all of her slides on landing a permanent position. I found this really helpful when I was applying for stuff. A lot of it, I mean, it's all very, like you have to be very driven for all of this. But it emphasizes even how, like, if you really want to be doing a research professor job, or in the US, we call it an R1 university, um, doing like teaching and outreach is not seen as a good thing because it gets in the way of research you could be doing. I don't love it, but that's how the attitude is at a lot of places. So, anyways, her her advice for applying is really useful. The AstroBetter blog and wiki is very helpful. Blog posts are about all kinds of things in professional astronomy. Some of it's career advice also. And the wiki is just a community sourced hub of information on all kinds of things, like setting up your computer, to applying for jobs, to how to hire a student, all kinds of things. And specifically, I wrote a wiki page about independent fellowships in Europe because there wasn't a great list of them. So a lot of these are junior group leader type positions in Europe and some postdoc fellowships. And also, I just wanted to mention, in case you hadn't heard of it yet, the AAS Job Register, that's the American Astronomical Society, super helpful, tons of stuff there about postdocs and faculty jobs. Um, Places have to pay a little bit of money to list it. So if somebody's hiring a project postdoc, they might not always put it up there. They might just email it around to their colleagues. But super helpful. And also the EAS, the European Astronomical Society Job Directory, super helpful. Tons of project postdocs up there. Highly recommend looking at those. If there are other job registries and job directories in astronomy and astrophysics, let me know and I will add that to these slides. So with that, thank you very much for watching, and I look forward to chatting with you tomorrow at the networking session. I hope this encourages a good discussion, and yeah, I look forward to talking to you tomorrow. Thanks very much.